All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our February Development Industry Roundtable. My name is Katie Worthington-Decker. I'm president of the Winter Haven Chamber, and I'm very excited to have you all on the call today for something that's been discussed for several years now. But as we always like to say, our city of Winter Haven is always looking for ways to do things smarter, better, faster, more efficiently for all of our, both our constituents as well as our businesses in the area. And the initiative that we're gonna start off the call today with is the Gray to Green initiative. And so we'll be glad to get into that in a moment. And then after we have a discussion of this, we will, as time permits, get an update from the Community Investment and Economic Development Department as well. And then if there is time that allows any roundtable updates that we do have.
The things that we're going to go over and the ideas that helped get us to this point, a lot of that came from this roundtable group. This was feedback. We had a good conversation a couple of years ago that was focused around what are the barriers that the development community sees to implementing green infrastructure and how can we help reduce those barriers. And what we're going to go over today is kind of the product and the resolution that has come of those original discussions. So this group is greatly appreciated, and they're helping to move the community forward in the way that we do design work. And so I'll give it on over to Tom. And Tom Singleton is a consultant that's been working with the city for 20 plus years. Tom, is that accurate? And has done knows the community really well. Also has a background working with DEP, does a lot of other consulting work at the state level, has a background as a developer himself, so brings a really unique perspective to the table.
Thank you, MJ. Welcome, everyone. We really appreciate the opportunity to come back and give you an update of our most recent efforts. I really appreciate MJ recognizing your previous contributions, and you have to know that your fingerprints are really all over this project. Joining me today is also Kevin Albrecht, a registered engineer in Florida, Albrecht Engineering Group. And he'll be available to help us with questions that you may have towards the end of the presentation. I also, though, want to open up the opportunity if you have questions, as we're going along, if you want to ask, I'm happy to take them. I know sometimes questions are best answered when we're dealing with the actual slide in question. So if you feel a pressing need to ask a question, just raise your hand. And Katie, if you'll help us identify those folks, then we can get those questions. As MJ mentioned, this is really the second part of the From Gray to Green project initiative. The first project developed a community development guide for increasing the use of LID to protect water quality, enhance public water supplies, reduce flooding, and protect natural resources in Winter Haven. It detailed 15 planning and 12 structural LID practices that promote infiltration. What you guys helped us understand better is how important it was to define a permitting method that would ensure that developers and engineers get credit for implementing low impact development design. So that's really what we're going to be presenting to you today. I should say that both of the manuals and this presentation are available at sustainablewinterhaven.net. So feel free to log on a little later today to get those. I do want to acknowledge that both projects were funded by DEP through an education grant with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. We really appreciate their help. They funded over 60% of the project, so we're very appreciative. I would like to also suggest that this is part of Winter Haven's commitment to protecting the community's lakes and water resources. The community's already invested more than $6 million, mostly through grants in the last 10 years, in 3 nature parks to treat and store urban runoff, and also in more than 45 rain gardens and infiltration projects throughout the downtown. We're going to be looking at some of those efforts today as well. I also want to recognize members of the various departments in Winter Haven, from Growth Management, Utility Services, Public Works, and the Natural Resources Division. Our objectives today are to introduce the various tools to you for permitting green infrastructure and low impact development, and specifically to provide guidance on applying those tools to design a more adaptable stormwater system for optimizing lake restoration, water supply, and flood protection. I want to emphasize the use of these tools is optional, but as you're going to see, I think there are many benefits. And so, and also you're going to see that many engineers and developers are already taking advantage of many of these opportunities. So again, the use of the tools is optional, but they may be beneficial to you. Some of those benefits include maximizing and receiving credit for infiltration of stormwater, and they may reduce your size of your BMPs, thereby reducing your infrastructure and development costs, meaning less pipes, less ponds, and perhaps less developable land, or perhaps increasing the amount of land that you have available to develop. But especially important to the community in the city of Winter Haven and your quality of life is to address existing water resource impacts. As I think you know, 20 of your 56 lakes in the community have impaired water quality and are required to be restored under state and federal regulations. Your water supply is near capacity, and you're increasing your dependence on the Peace Creek Drainage Canal for flood protection, but you need to recognize it was never developed to provide urban flood protection and provides very limited flood protection, in fact, even for agriculture. So there are good reasons for why we're doing this. Most of all, I want you to recognize that the development community stands to benefit from these practices. I just want to give you a couple of examples of reducing the opportunity to reduce your development costs with the CVS just adjacent to the downtown. As you can see, there's a large pond. You might refer to this as a traditional development, but what we're going to be talking about today is the opportunity to distribute your stormwater practices throughout your site through a distributed system. And the estimate that we did on this particular project is that there's the potential to save more than $40,000 in infrastructure costs, because in fact, you could completely eliminate the internal collection system using a series of drainage swales and rain gardens. And you could also significantly increase your site utilization. In other words, if you need to build a larger building, perhaps you could. Or another alternative is perhaps you don't even have to buy as large a site. So if you're buying less land, you could significantly reduce your development costs by reducing your land purchase costs. I also want to just point to the DOT Drainage Pond, which frankly is an opportunity to do better. And it's an eyesore, and it's a reminder that we're not doing stormwater management just to meet regulations. And in fact, we can make better design choices. And that's what I'm going to be spending most of my time about today, is talking about some of those design choices. In just a few minutes, we're going to talk about the Grove Roots Brewing Company as an excellent example of how to get it right. And I think it's really nice how it stands in such stark contrast with a DOT pond, which quite frankly is very ugly. You've never seen any water in it, and you'll never see any water in it. It's grossly over-designed, and it creates a profound quality of life impact within your community that could and should be enhanced. I like to say, if it's ugly, we can do better. Maybe I should a better way of saying it, if it's ugly, it's wrong. And if you'll just remember that one adage today, I think it'll be a careful reminder to try to do better in the design choices that you're making. We're going to talk briefly about the permitting methods, the design principles, and then how to bring all of these things together. So 3 principal parts. With regard to the permitting methods, I do want to point out that we've got a technical training session for engineers, designers, and planners that's going to be held the first week in March 3rd from 1:30 to 3:30. Along with all of the members of the Roundtable, we're also sending out invitations to 34 engineers who have actually submitted development projects to the community in the last 2 years. If there's others that you think you should participate, please send them a copy of the link as well. We sure would appreciate it. Here's the list of invitations that are going out today. So in addition to the roundtable members, we've also got local engineers and planners that are listed here. So you might look for your name. You may get one, you may get two invitations today, because I guess many of you of these engineers and planners are also members of the Development Roundtable. So those emails will be coming out today. The Roundtable will get an email from MJ through Katie, and the engineers, planners, and developers will be getting an email directly from MJ. So I hope you guys can participate. I do want to spend most of my time today talking about the design principles, because it's actually through better design you can optimize the benefits of your stormwater system. And I want to begin with, what do we mean by from gray to green? What exactly are you talking about? And here's a series of graphics that are going to help tell the story. When we talk about gray systems, we're talking about the conventional pipe and pond stormwater systems that we have today, which are all about draining, directing, and disposing of water. And the thing that's important to understand, by disposing and directing water away from the landscape, we're actually short-circuiting the natural processes that help clean up the water and help recharge our aquifer and help recharge our local lakes. The alternative is to transition to green systems or vegetation-based stormwater systems that are designed to slow, spread, soak, and store water within the landform, very much like the design I was just talking about a few minutes ago, a distributed LID system. These are storage systems that protect and mimic natural processes. From a slightly more technical perspective, and this is about as technical as I'm going to get today, because I know we've got a mixed audience, so I hope you'll stay with me. What we're talking about here is transitioning from controlling peak flows, which are important, to also reducing runoff volumes. What we've come to understand is when we control peak flows only, the total volume of water leaving the site can increase dramatically, dewatering areas, but more importantly, also potentially flooding areas downstream. This can both impact water quantity and quality, and significantly reduce the water stores that are available to both the lakes and your drinking water supply. By reducing runoff volumes, we're actually maximizing the capture of rainwater to reduce the volume of water that's discharged downstream, and we're then replicating the natural rainfall system, rainfall response to rainfall. And it turns out that this is really important to protecting water quantity and water quality. You may have seen this before from DE. When we take land and develop it, and we develop the stormwater systems under our practices today, we can increase the amount of runoff by 5 times or more. And we can reduce the amount of infiltration into our groundwater, recharging our aquifer by more than 60%. In effect, what we're doing is reducing the stormwater runoff. By reducing the stormwater runoff through the methods we're presenting today, we can help maintain the water balance. This is not anti-development. It's just about getting the water into the ground as quickly as possible, making sure that it can be put to beneficial use to the community and not cause additional problems. I just want to point to a couple of legacy issues that really drive this point home. You know, much of your downtown is 100% impervious, and this is just one example. And because of the imperviousness, oftentimes the water either goes directly into a pipe and gets discharged directly to the lake, impacting water quality. But it can also quickly become overwhelmed, and you've probably seen flooding right down through Central Avenue and in some of the adjacent areas. But there's a tremendous opportunity to retrofit these areas to get the water into the ground. And it doesn't mean necessarily creating a lot of green open space, although that can and is beneficial. You can see over here, the city's actually constructed some of its rain gardens along this area to take off some of the load from the city parking lot. But let me just give you a sense of how much water is potentially being lost to your aquifer and which could be more naturally recharged to your area lakes. The rainwater loss from 1 acre of land in Winter Haven is estimated to be close to 2/3 of a million gallons of water per year. That's a heck of a lot of water, and enough to serve, excuse me, just 1 second. It's enough to meet the annual needs of 14 people or 6 households. We're talking about a significant amount of water that can be protected within your community. And our presentation today is about how to do that. The conditions downtown are one of the reasons why the city's already invested in 4 nature parks to treat the urban runoff. Remember my comment before, if it's ugly, it's wrong? Well, I'll just tell you, if it's pretty, it's right. And this is the Lake Howard Nature Park, which is an 11-acre hydrologic restoration project that captures stormwater runoff from the downtown area of a 578-acre urban watershed. This site is so beautiful that it's probably one of the most heavily visited sites within the community. So it truly is a community asset, serving to benefit water quality in the lake, help recharge the aquifer, and most importantly, it's also providing a place to get away from the constant grind of our everyday lives. The photo on the right was taken by Mike Britt, and many of you may recognize that's Kim Hansel, your former director of utility services, who was a really big proponent of the graded green approach. So thank you, Kim. The water losses, though, at a regional scale are much greater and are truly profound. And what we're looking at here are potentiometric surface maps on the left-hand side, which show the amount of water that's actually contained within your aquifer that supplies your drinking water supply, and that also helps keep your lakes full of water. On the right, so on the left, you can see the pre-development condition. On the right, you can see the potentiometric surface levels in 2008. And what this is showing is that there's been in excess of a 10-foot reduction in your aquifer levels below your community. This is reflected partly in terms of lower lake levels within your community. And it also is reflected in a reduction in the amount of water that is potentially available to supply your water supply wells. This is a really big deal. Back in 2014, as part of the Central Florida Water Initiative, Kevin and I made estimates of what those lake storage losses might be. And if you consider that these lakes are recharged every day when it rains, or whenever it rains, we're estimating that you're losing about 146 million gallons per day, which is 10 times greater than Winter Haven's water supply needs in 2050. We're talking about a whole lot of water. If you're interested in getting a copy of this report, just let me know. I'll be happy to send it to you and see how we did the calculus. So I hope at this point I've convinced you that rainwater is a resource to protect. We don't want to be getting rid of it. We want to capture it. We want to store the rainwater and the runoff. We want to facilitate infiltration and groundwater recharge. If we do that, we can filter and assimilate the pollutants in the rainwater and the runoff. The water is essential to sustaining the natural hydrologic processes and ecological systems. They're absolutely essential to our lake and watershed health. And ultimately, it's going to be really important to providing flood development in many of the downstream areas of your community. Bottom line, I don't think I exaggerate when I say here that protecting rainwater represents the greatest opportunity for meeting the city's water resource needs. Remember, rainwater is your primary source of fresh water, recharging your lakes, your aquifers, and supplying your drinking water. It's not the groundwater, that's a secondary source. It's your rainwater, which is recharging your aquifer, providing your drinking water, and protecting your lakes. You'll be getting a handout a little later today, which provides an LID design checklist. It's also included within the manual, which again is posted on the website, sustainablewinterhaven.net. What I'm going to do is just go through some of these design principles to give you a sense of what we're talking about. And mostly I'm going to use lots of pictures and examples from your very own community, because as I mentioned at the outset, many of your local engineers, designers, and developers are well aware of the benefits they derive from implementing these practices. And I think our only message today is that even in those instances, though, oftentimes we can do a little bit better. So even if you're doing these things, I hope that you'll take the opportunity to help refine your efforts and use our manual to do that. The first concept for avoiding impacts is to use hydrology as an integrating framework. And we need to understand that not only is it important to implement the practices we're talking about at the site level, but at the street level, and then eventually throughout your entire community. And we're going to look at some of those examples from your community. This is very much an important part of distributing the infiltration of water throughout your community to optimize benefits. You don't have to look far, though, to realize that your central park provides a wonderful backbone for your community, not only in terms of your civic life, but also providing a high recharge area right in the middle of your downtown community. We're going to be looking at a number of older projects that were developed back in the 60s that build on this very same principle of providing open space for infiltration. So look forward to that. The next way to avoid impacts is to use your existing flow paths. And there's really two priorities in Winter Haven. I want to bring your attention to the geology map on the right, which is showing us well-drained areas in the downtown of Winter Haven. This is where you've got karst geology overlaid by sands. It's extremely well-drained, an area of high infiltration. And then your downtown area is surrounded by more poorly drained soils with much lower infiltration capacity. So the two priorities we're looking for here is if you're in the downtown, we want to increase your infiltration as much as possible to increase treatment. And if you're in the lower, more poorly drained areas, the purple areas, those are the areas that we're going to be looking to increase your storage and conveyance. It's interesting that in many instances, some of those lower areas are naturally low and hold water. And we want to make certain that we are providing adequate storage for the waters that are already being stored within these areas. Another way to avoid impacts is to preserve open spaces and natural areas. And this is a comparison between a conventional design and an LID design. Notice that in both, we're looking at the same number of lots, albeit smaller lots with the LID design, with an emphasis on increasing your open space and vegetation and retention areas. Throughout the country, we're learning that LID designs not only significantly enhance the preservation of water processes and natural processes, but it significantly increases the sale of properties. These are much more desirable communities to live in, and the sellout times for such developments can be extremely fast. I want to come back to this concept of not just meeting regulations, but making better design choices. And protecting open spaces and natural areas is extremely important. And this is an example that actually comes from the Water Management District Permit Manual. If you have a natural landscape with a riparian area, you don't want to build over it if you can avoid it. And the LID designs suggest that we can, in fact, avoid building over these riparian areas and still retain our building and parking as we desired. Unfortunately, our regulations today, however, can allow you to build over riparian areas with a profound impact to your community. And although you may be providing compensating areas shown in green in the center graphic, they nowhere can compensate for the benefits that are lost by building over your riparian areas. So we don't want to just meet regulations. We want to make better design choices. Doing this and not doing this should be a no-brainer. I think it's interesting to see that you did this, in fact, with your Winter Haven Chain of Lakes Sports Complex, where you you moved all of your buildings and structures up out of the floodplain and areas that are recognized to flood. And although you do have some of your ballparks within areas that, as this graphic shows, could flood within extremely high water conditions, you're reducing that risk of loss of property significantly. And in this instance, you're not building into the floodplain at all, or into the natural areas that are currently undisturbed, which is really important. We want to integrate hard and soft engineering. Many of the designs we're seeing today are really all about dry retention, wet retention, and flow control devices, so-called hard engineering. But it's these other choices on the left shown in green, the soft engineering, that allow us to mimic natural processes and optimize that to infiltrate, evapotranspire, and reuse stormwater. But even still, you have to recognize that as good as those soft engineering practices can be, they do not fully restore the functions of your natural infrastructure. They only mitigate. In integrating hard and soft engineering, we're in effect, these are the processes by which we can slow, spread, and soak. We want to combine multiple systems together for the purposes of flow control, detention, retention, filtration, infiltration, and treatment. And we're going to be looking at some projects here in just a minute that integrate virtually all of these different aspects to produce really desirable and high-performing sites from a water resource perspective, and also from a quality of life perspective. As you're selecting your structural practices, do so by location, starting where the rain falls on your roof, and then into your other impervious areas, and working out from there to where you have runoff, even off of your pervious areas and your open spaces. We want to link stormwater controls as a system. We want to use redundant runoff treatment systems and reduce the reliance on traditional conveyance and pond technologies. In this example, we can see water falls on the roof, goes into a cistern, overflows from a cistern into a neighboring garden area, and eventually flows down through the remainder of the property. This is what we mean by creating a tortured source or a pathway for water so that it gets into the ground as quickly as possible. We're not putting it into a pipe. In fact, this particular design here has no pipes and has no conveyance system, no ponds. One of the best examples I can point to of getting this right is the Winter Haven Fire Station #1, right there in the downtown, which was completed a number of years ago. It's a beautiful site. It was able to retain some significant legacy oak trees. There's significant provisions of additional plantings of vegetation throughout the site, but the site is one serious interconnected series of swales which collect the runoff from your buildings and parking areas. And it's really, it's a wonderful design. There's one pond, although it's a shallow pond here on the west side of the property that otherwise wasn't able to be accommodated in the remainder of the swales. But wow, what a beautiful project. This is the legacy that you as a community want to leave our children. It's this type of development that goes a long way to protecting our water resources. But I mentioned at the outset of the presentation, you guys in Winter Haven have been doing this for quite some time. And Katie, the building you're in is an early model for LID. And you probably recognize this. It goes vertical. So it's minimizing the amount of impervious area by being multi-story. You capture all the water that runs off the roof, and then you quickly place it into shallow swales adjacent to the building and throughout the parking areas. This is truly a wonderful design. Here again, this is the chamber building. These are the parking areas. See the broad swales. You know, every time I'm in Winter Haven, I typically come over here, I get my sandwich at the library, and I sit in the park. And I'm not alone. I'm usually accompanied by 20 or more people, particularly on a beautiful day, maybe not on a cold day like today. But This is the backbone of your community. This is a central part of protecting your water resources. I love this project too. It goes vertical, 4 stories in fact, and the residential structures are located on top of the parking area. So you're minimizing your amount of impervious surfaces. You do have a broad, shallow swale. We have significant vegetation plantings. I just simply love this project, and we need to be doing more of it. I think it's really nice too, how it fits into the neighboring linear park here that again is almost adjacent to your downtown, actually City Hall. I spend a lot of time in this area. It's located also at your chain of lakes walkway here. I mentioned this earlier. The Grove Roots Brewing Company was an example of a 100% impervious area. They did an excellent job. I think this was done by the 610 Development Company. They eliminated and disconnected a lot of their impervious surface. And it's remarkable. They're containing virtually 100% of the runoff from this site on site in these vegetation areas here and throughout your parking lot. I like spending time here too, as I suspect many of you do as well. I'm a big proponent of downtown redevelopments, and one of the things I really like about this design is the construction of this half wall, which helps maintain the urban line that you would expect to find in a downtown area. So it's highly functional. It's a beautiful site. We need to see more development like this, redevelopment like this in the downtown. Oh, look at this wonderful area here too, showing your infiltration trench located right within the property. City Hall itself is a wonderful example, built in the early 60s. All of the water off the roof is collected in downspouts and captured in this area right here, where it goes directly into the ground, infiltrating immediately. Here's a view from inside that area, showing that there are, in fact, features here that if water got up high enough, it could actually flow directly through a vertical well into the groundwater. But to my knowledge, those wells have never had to be utilized because you're in such a high recharge area. But this is a wonderful design. We just need to get a few more plants in here and it would be even more successful. This is the Winter Haven Utility Services building. This rain garden was probably the first set of rain gardens constructed in the community by Kim Hansel, the former director of utility services. This was a virtual asphalt desert. It was not a nice place to be. And now it's a really nice place to be. And you oftentimes see staff sitting outside, relaxing, having their lunches. It has significantly enhanced the quality of life for the folks working at this building. It's controlling the runoff directly that comes off these roofs and captures all of that water. None of it actually flows into the adjacent parking areas. The community has spent literally $1 million or more in rainwater projects, infiltration projects along your rights of way. This here is adjacent to your library. It's significantly added just an overall quality to what's a really great project anyway in the library. And of course, this is one of the city services buildings with a beautiful rain garden. These things are pretty, they're highly functional. We need to be doing more of them. They need to be throughout your community and throughout all new development. One of the things that is going to be really important to be paying attention to is the importance of developing maintenance plans to ensure that the BMPs are performing as designed. Now, this is not only important for the dry and wet detention ponds that are out there, and quite frankly, are oftentimes neglected and become highly non-functional. They become filled with sediment and just simply don't work anymore. But it's especially important for the type of bioretention facilities that we've been talking about, and the infiltration facilities and permeable pavements. All stormwater systems require maintenance. Just so happens because a pipe is out of sight and out of mind, we think we don't have to do anything with it, but in fact we do. And by constructing LID bioretention facilities, we're actually putting that infrastructure on the surface where it can be more easily maintained. And again, it provides quality to the site. Putting it all together can be a challenge. As I hope I've already suggested, it requires a certain amount of planning, science, and engineering. But to do all of those things requires a certain art. You know, it's not ironic that when we say water, we all think about it in different ways. And this is part of the challenge. We have to think of water in terms of all of its beneficial aspects to our community. And we have to come together to enhance our designs. So I have just a few summary slides to sort of summarize everything that I've told you. I hope you understand now that green infrastructure and hydrologic functions are the key to selecting your structural and your non-structural BMPs. But remember, your structural engineered controls are at best only mitigate impacts. It's your non-structural planning controls that really are about restoring and conserving your hydrologic functions. I hope through the one example I shared with you, and I can share others, they're cost effective, they're practical, and often more efficient than structural controls. And clearly they should be implemented before structural controls. In sum, we want to make room for our floodwaters. We want to filter and cleanse that runoff. We want to store water for dry days and droughts. And with climate change, we have a lot more dry days and droughts. We want to recharge the aquifer for water supply. We want to let the water flow for nature. And most importantly, we want to maintain the natural hydrological cycle of rainfall that recharges our aquifer for both our lakes and our water supply. A lot of times people say, but our community is already built out. And I want to suggest to you that there's a huge opportunity to restore your water resources, not in your areas that are already developed, but also in your developed areas. And in fact, you have throughout your entire watershed, more than half of, well, twice the amount of land that you currently have developed could be developed at some point in the future. That includes, however, floodplains and lakes that have to be protected. So there's a tremendous opportunity as we have development that occurs in these areas to think about how to do that in a way that will protect your water resources. With the construction of the Central Polk Parkway, it becomes ever more incumbent upon us to think about the designs for all of the development that is already coming to these areas. In closing, you can be the architect of your water future. As Luna Leopold said, the health of our waters is the principal measure of how we live on the land. You have a beautiful community. It can be made even more beautiful. As your community builds out, you can ensure that you have the infrastructure for protecting your lakes and the water supply that you'll need to support your community. You're already doing a great job. I hope that you'll find that the two manuals that I've shared with you today, and most importantly, the permitting manual that just has been released today, that you'll put it to good use. So with that, I'll stop and answer any questions that you may have.
So as I mentioned, you all can unmute yourselves if you do have a question. I have to apologize. I turned off the chat feature for the State of the State webinar, and it carried over to Zoom meeting. So I apologize. The chat feature is missing from the bottom of your screen. And unfortunately, it's turned back on, but it won't let it do it midstream. So, but if you have a question for Tom or MJ, or anyone on the call, a couple of you have texted, yes, I'm recording this, so I will send this link out to you all so you can catch up. I know we've all become very good Zoom multitaskers over this last year. So, and then as Tom mentioned, there'll be some additional materials that I can send out to you on this, and there'll be specific, more technical training sessions down the road for those of you on the call. I wrote down the "if it's ugly, it's wrong" quote, because I feel like that means a lot to a lot of people, no matter what your hat you wear on this development industry roundtable. So I'll open it up for questions. Like I said, you can unmute yourself if you have a specific question. So I will stop talking for a minute and take a look at the participant window here. Anyone have any questions for Tom? All right, I don't see anyone unmuting themselves. And Tom, if it's okay, if they do, can I send out your contact information as well? Or Carrie, I just saw you unmute yourself. Do you have a question, sir?
You mentioned the big FDOT pond downtown and how ugly it is. Can totally agree with that. Any suggestions, or is the city working on some plans with respect to that?
I can tackle that one, Tom. Yeah, so Carrie, we're looking at some things right now, but it's gonna be part of a bigger effort. Essentially, we're gonna have to compensate for the stormwater volume there somewhere else within the watershed. We have some ideas on maybe how to do that, but not something that's gonna happen overnight. But I think it's something we can make happen in the long run.
When you say accommodating it elsewhere, does it mean you have to take that potential volume, which is never ever used, and put it elsewhere, or can there be some modification of how much water you have to actually
No, in essence, it means we have to take that potential volume that might never be used and account for it somewhere else, and that is FDOT property. That is FDOT's insurance policy against their road flooding, and they're not willing to wiggle on that too much, but they are willing to entertain the idea of, if we can figure out a different way to account for that volume, that we can do something different at that site.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And any other questions for Tom or MJ?
I have a quick one, and I apologize if it was touched on. I joined late. What is, and maybe this is for MJ or Dustin, maybe, what is the relationship between the gray to green effort that we've been doing for a couple of years and One Water? How do those two things kind of mesh together?
Yeah, I think they all kind of fit in, you know. So gray to green is it's something we've been evolving, specifically with this development roundtable group's input, on ways that we can make it easier for the developers to achieve some of these things. One of the big hurdles outlined previously was, that developers were hitting a brick wall with the water management district when it came to permitting. And so the tool that we've created and the process that we've created for site design allows local developers to use that tool and know that if they take that to the water management district, it will be accepted. And so I think this is just like one small piece of everything that we're trying to achieve with One Water.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Eric?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to figure out from my shop, what should we be pushing forward now as far as, trying to codify some of this stuff, or is it better to wait until One Water's done and kind of look at it holistically and do it all together, that kind of thing?
And we can catch up on that, Eric. We've identified some really low-hanging fruit that we think we can tackle in the short term, and then continue working through the bigger planning stuff in the long term.
Okay.
All right.
Eric, I guess just the one comment I would add there is that, remember, it's this rainwater that is recharging your aquifer, which is really all about their public supplies of water. This is where it all begins. So your One Water initiative will succeed without fail the better you do the job of capturing and storing rainwater for beneficial use. So they're not separate. This is a distinct part of your One Water initiative, and it's a critical part of maximizing the amount of water that's available to your community and available to protect your lakes.
Yep.
Very good. Any other questions before we move on to other updates? All right. Well, as I mentioned, we will send out a follow-up with more information to you on this, and look forward to our development community. What got me on this one from the very beginning, from years ago, but also just recently on the updates is, MJ said, hey, this is a great opportunity for businesses and developers to save money in the long run, and while also benefiting our environment. So it's very much a win-win, although it's a change in behavior in many ways. So really, as Winter Haven always is, trying to push to the forefront of innovation. And the water conversation is ongoing. If you happen to watch the State of the State, County, and City, it was one of the top priorities of the county as well, with the Polk Water Cooperative and how to deal with water. So will certainly be something, if we can be proactive about it, it's better for all of us. So at this point, I'd like to
Stop sharing. Very good. Thank you.
yeah,
Thank you all very much. And if
Thanks,
you will
Tom.
please complete the evaluation you'll receive a little later today. Thank
Yes.
you.
Yes, I'll send out an evaluation. And if you don't mind taking a minute to respond to that, that does help with the grant that is helping to fund this process as well. So please take a couple minutes to fill out that evaluation. So I'm going to pitch it over to Sean Byers with Community Investment and Economic Development. I'm still practicing the new title, but Sean, do you want to give us an update with everything? And you have got a lot going on in that department right now. So give us a 101 on it, please.
Okay, well, good morning, all. I'm going to hit on the high points. Katie's correct. We do have a lot going on, but we've been working on 3 rather significant code changes over the last few months. And I want to touch on each of those, which are coming to fruition, and we'll be getting the final action from the City Commission later this month. First one is dumpsters. As most folks know, the city has a dumpster screening ordinance that's been in place since about 2005. That ordinance has been somewhat problematic in enforcement over the years. So staff has gone back and taken a new look at it. And what we've done is we've eliminated the mandatory compliance. So anyone that has a current dumpster that's not in compliance will not require to bring it into compliance unless they either change out their dumpster or they change the use of the property. And then they'll come and be required to comply with the screening requirements. Furthermore, if you're located to the rear of the building or you're more than 100 feet from the street, we're not going to require the screening. And that will hopefully eliminate the number of required enclosures within the city. The idea is if it's out of sight, it's out of mind, and there's no need to require you to screen something that's not really that visible from the public view. And then finally, we're going to continue to have a DRC approval waiver process. You can apply to the City Development Review Committee to waive the dumpster requirements. And that would be instances where it's just physically impractical to actually accomplish the screening. So we're hoping that this provides some clarity and some ability for business owners to provide to comply with the ordinance without having to jump through as many hoops as were required in the past. The next ordinance that we've got moving forward is regarding chickens. Essentially what the city is going to do now is we're going to allow property owners to keep chickens in their fenced yards with a coop. And the number of chickens that we've settled on is 5 chickens is the maximum number. I will say that this ordinance has had great deliberation, both at the Planning Commission and City Commission level. And I would say that this is just a start on the urban farming, urban agriculture movement. And we'll see how it moves forward with the 5 that looks like it's going to be approved. So hopefully our residents will find that of benefit if they so choose to go down the urban farming route. And then the last major code change we're doing, and it's mostly a repackaging of the code as much as it is changes to the actual code. Right now, if you go into the zoning code, all the lot and building requirements for the commercial zoning districts are contained in a large table. We're actually splitting those requirements all out into the individual zoning districts within the code. What that does for the users of the code is it gives you one central place for each zoning district to find all your necessary information. When you're surfing online and viewing the city's code, it makes it much more user-friendly, and we hope that everyone will find that of a more useful form of the code. So those are the primary code changes that we've been working on. And in addition to that, we have been, the single-family residential market still been very, very active. And we've got several large projects we've been working through the approval process. B&B Ranch on the south end of County Road 653, down by Old Bartow Lake Wells Road. We've worked on additional phases for the Inman Groves property out on Dundee Road, and then a handful of other smaller proposed projects throughout the city. But hopefully that would be probably a little summary of what we've been up to since we last met. I believe it was September or October. Don't have the exact date, but we've been quite busy.
Yes, they've had a lot going on. If you did not get a chance to listen to the commissioners debate the chicken ordinance and need a good laugh, it was quite the funny conversation about chickens and chicken anatomy and lots of different things on that debate. So very entertaining. And I saw some cheers about the dumpster, some good positive reactions about the dumpsters from people on the call. That's a big change. I mean, that is will be significant for many businesses in terms of having to put their dumpsters behind a fence or whatever it might be. So that is a very, I think, positive change in many ways with that. And as Sean mentioned, they are working on a lot of development projects and residential wise, and there have been some very thoughtful debates at the city commission meeting about these projects to make sure that we're getting the best product for our community that we can. You know, many of you heard that Harmony has been purchased by DR Horton, and was excited to hear that they are truly going to try to work through the PUD, which our growth management department worked extremely hard on that document. That was an hour and a half long. I think just the presentation of the PUD to the city commission the first time that came forward. So that's exciting to see that they are very interested in trying to stick to the PUD where that makes sense. Before I am going to put, well, I don't know if I can put Julie on the spot about it because she'll probably say she can't talk about it, but many of you may have seen the announcement that Coca-Cola applied for a tax abatement at the county in order to purchase the 407,000 square foot warehouse at the ILC, which has obviously been a big project that Julie and Bruce have been working on with the community partners. Julie, I know you may be under confidentiality. I don't know if you can say anything, but would you like to say anything on that project? You're muted too.
We really don't have permission from them to really say much other than, you know, we've worked on this for months and we're very excited that the building that has been vacant since basically 2000, you know, for last 5 years is, fingers crossed, will close. And then they'll be in business, you know, fairly soon.
Great.
And it's bringing both jobs from Lakeland, and then they're expanding. So they're going from 100,000 square feet to the 407,000. And the new jobs are manufacturing jobs. So those are better paying, higher paying than distribution jobs. So yeah, we're very excited about it. And it's the first step now, we think, because between Florida Can and Coca-Cola, that we've got a little cluster going, and then we've got lots of other leads out there because of this, start here.
Yes, yeah, very good. And it was, certain details were released publicly on Friday and then yesterday at the county commission hearing. So it is exciting to see. I know the Ledger jumped on top of it for an article yesterday. So there'll be obviously more information coming out on that. But that is exciting and always good to see. 300 plus new Winter Haven jobs, although I think it's 180 are coming from Lakeland, but that's still a significant number of jobs coming towards Winter Haven. So congratulations and cross your fingers, knock on wood, all the superstitious stuff that we're able to see that project close, which is very exciting. So I wanted to open it up to any questions. You've got a robust city team on the call today as well. And we do have some new members on the call today as well. We have Vasquez Construction on the call today and many other of our construction companies and development companies on the call today. Feel free to unmute if you have any questions before we will adjourn. And if there are anybody that wants to make announcements for your company as well, feel free to do so. All right. Very good. Well, thank you all for coming on the call today. As I said, we will, I'll put this recording up on YouTube, send it out to you when we're ready, as well as a follow-up to the Gray to Green initiative today. So thank you all for jumping on the call today, and we will reconvene in 2 months. Thank you.